This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Atom Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, Lewitt, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now on the new Lewitt Ray microphone with Aura, Auto Gain, and EQ mode through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic pre, mixed through Isotope, Voice Enhancement Assistant, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
When I do have success or find something that works, or get to know a new plugin even, and kind of what it brings emotionally to an instrument, let's say, the only way to file that away as a thing I can duplicate for next time is if I know not only the plugin that I opened and like what the GUI looked like, but also like how I drove it and why, you know?
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. In 2024, Atom Audio celebrates 25 years of designing industry-leading monitors in Berlin, unveiling the Arctic White A4V and A7V series, available for a limited time. With the XART ribbon tweeter design, customizable speaker voicings, and SonarWorks integration for room correction, these monitors deliver professional-grade sound perfect for Grammy-winning producers and home studios. Make your studio cooler than cool with the Arctic White series and get the Atom Audio A4V and A7V with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy Rockstars, it's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Todd Burke, who's been recording and mixing records and underscores in Los Angeles for over 25 years. His album credits include Ben Harper, Jack Johnson, the Kooks, Belle and Sebastian, M83, and Fitz and the Tantrums. More recently, he's been enjoying mixing Atmos versions of records by Albert Hammond Jr., Christina Perri, and Jeff Goldblum, and working as a score mixer. A few notable films include The Big Sick, Daddy's Home 1 and 2, Second Act, I Feel Pretty, The Lovebirds, Stargirl, The King of Staten Island, Yes Day, and The Bubble. He also dabbles a bit in album mastering with recent projects for the Lickerish Quartet, Motochrist, and Greyboy Allstars. As a teacher, he's a main contributor on the recordBetter project and is passionate about handing the art of record making on to young creators. And he is a brand ambassador and artist representative for Antelope Audio. He's available for engineering bookings in Los Angeles and abroad. Favorite tracking rooms include Sunset Sound and Capitol Studios. His own studio, affectionately coined Listening Room LA, is in the foothills east of LA and outfitted with an Aurora Audio 10-channel sidecar, 24-channel Aurora Audio GTM mixer, and the most modern generation of digital conversion from Antelope Audio and Chord Electronics, Atmos monitoring on an array by Wilson Audio, as well as mastering-grade stereo monitoring on a custom Tannoy system by Chris Pelonis. Thank you so much to Ken Sluter for connecting us and making our introduction. Please welcome Todd Burke to Recording Studio Rockstars. Todd, Are you ready to rock?
I think
dude?
so. Yeah, man, that was a mouthful. That was like a lot to get through. I feel like
I know.
I feel like
I know. Luckily, I have the ability to drop little edits in there, so the rock stars will never know where I stumbled on reading the intro there.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you here, dude. A lot of cool stuff. So you're joining us from your studio now, and of course I can see it in the video. And I think you went through the efforts to make a really nice sort of video setup and get into video work. You've even got some great YouTube videos up on your channel and stuff like that. And Rockstars, we'll have links to Todd's work in the show notes, so you can scroll down, you can press play on his records, you can click over to the YouTube channel, click over to recordBetter and other projects like that. But tell us a little bit about where you are and give us a little bit of your brief arc from getting into this stuff. I know here we're a couple of older guys now. You're making all these records, but at some point you thought music is fun, right?
At some point, yeah. I mean, I guess if we go back to, so I've always thought music was fun, I suppose. And, I was kind of the kid. I kind of stumbled into this I'm not sure that I even, I was so young when I got into this that I didn't even really have that much. I can't say that I had really a plan, but I just kind of got out of high school and, didn't really know what to do with myself and stumbled upon an ad in one of those. I was living in Phoenix, Arizona, and I think the magazine was called New Times. It was like, remember those like entertainment newspapers that were a thing in like the 90s? There was one, like LA Weekly was the one in LA, of course. I think the one in Phoenix is called New Times. But and in the back, though, there was an ad for this little recording school called the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences, which has now become a pretty large institution, but at the time was a little Ramsey console stuffed into a little office in a strip mall. It was pretty humble. But it did seem interesting. I had a 4-track and did a little recording in high school. And it seemed like it's something worth checking out. And the rest is history, as they say. Now I'm a graybeard. Now I got this big gray beard, and I'm hanging out in L.A., getting intros like the one you just spewed out, which sounds, somewhat elaborate.
Were you impressed with yourself?
Well, I don't want to say all that, but I guess I am quite impressed with myself.
Yeah, it's all right. That's why we have a show called Recording Studio Rockstars.
Rockstars in the title. Yes. Yeah.
We can be impressed with each other. Yeah, man. Phoenix, what a place. I mean, I've had amazing interns from Crass here at my studio in Nashville. So I've met a lot of students, and I've been really impressed with the way they do things there. Phoenix itself is pretty fascinating. I was always a Meat Puppets fan.
Okay.
So I was a little bit fascinated about the music scene coming from there.
When I was there...
Did you stick around in Phoenix long enough to really get into the local music scene?
I was there for about a year and a half, I think. After I had some family living down there. So when I grew up in Colorado, after high school, I went down there just trying to figure out what I was going to do with myself. But at the time, this was like 92 or so. And there was a band called the Gin Blossoms who had just been signed out of Phoenix, and there was a little excitement. It kind of created a little excitement in that music scene. Didn't really amount to much, I don't think, for Phoenix, but it was a moment in Phoenix history that was interesting to be near.
Yeah. Well, all right. So you went straight to school for this stuff. Now, what about the thing that sort of drove you to want to do that? Did you start out with 4 tracks or any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I had a 4-track in high school. Mainly I just played around bands. I'm a drummer. So,
drummer first.
Yeah, I played in a few bands in high school, I was playing in a band in Phoenix at the time that I kind of, saw this ad and thought I might take a crack at the school. But it was just kind of that thing, someone explained to me once how, pretty early on, how sort of royalty streams work and how that can play out for a lot of drummers, non-songwriting drummers. And it seemed like I might want to maybe think this through a little bit, Yeah, really. No hate for drummers. I'm not saying that, but for me, it seemed clear that I knew I wanted to be in music. I knew I loved music and wanted that to be my life. But the path of the drummer can be a little tricky.
Yeah. Well, drums are fun. And I mean, one of the things that I certainly notice on your records is that the drums sound great. So I'm always struck by that.
I've said,
You know, there's
I
a lot
often
of great...
say, I think that drummers tend to get into this role. I think, I know a lot of my peers are drummers, and I think it can just be a really good fit, you know, and I think there's a bunch of reasons for that, but there's something about, I think, the mindset of approaching music from a kind of rhythmic and sort of a deeply sort of energy-based approach to the way music moves people. Can really, I think, play out well from, you know, this side of the glass, so to speak.
Do you feel like your understanding of drums really informs your opinion on whether the stuff coming out of the speaker sounds
For
right?
sure, yeah. And I think that, so definitely. But I think kind of even maybe bigger than that, I'm going to have some friends that are going to hate me for saying this, but, you know, I think that it's easier coming from a sort of drummer mindset as a mixer to not get quite so lost in the weeds of intonation. And I think there's just sort of less weeds to get lost in maybe when you're coming from a bit more of a meat-headed drummer sensibility. And I mean that, you know, as positively as I possibly can. But it's, you know, I think there's a sort of a purer and simpler approach to the way music makes people dance, particularly coming from a drummer's mind. And I think that can serve you well as a mixer.
Yeah, it's like you're focused on the emotion, the sort of the body emotion of the music, as opposed to
the sickest guitar sound you've ever heard or whatever, you know, like,
the sickest guitar sound or tuning. I mean, tuning really, like, I can really get sucked into hearing the tuning on things.
I know
which can be helpful sometimes, but it can also be
it's not unimportant, and shit needs to be in tune. But I do know, I've got peers who can really get like spend, you know, real hours go by, sometimes really obsessing over intonation. And at the end of the day, I don't know. I'm a little bit more of a meathead than that, and I guess all I'm trying to say is I feel like it serves me well. I hope that people agree.
Have you considered calling your studio Meathead?
I have, yeah. I think it's a good idea, actually. I'm thinking that right now.
But when it comes to drums and tuning, I mean, there is also a thing about the drums being in tune. Is that something that you feel like you have an appreciation for? Do you have any thoughts on any of that?
To a degree. I mean, I know people who can, again, like, you know, guitar players and mainly that can get can get very into sort of tuning the fundamental pitches of drums to the key of the song and all that stuff. And I'll be honest, I've never had that work out for me. I've never really, you know, I mean, you know, drums are a funny thing, and tuning drums in the studio is a funny thing, but I tend to find that, like, you know, every drum, there's kind of a range of pitch that's relatively narrow, that where every drum is the happiest or sort of the most itself, you know? And you know, when tracking a band, I think, you know, I always like to have a lot of drums around. I've got a couple dozen snare drums back here in the corner, and I just like to have a lot of tubs around. Not so much so that I can try to sort of manhandle any given one into the right pitch, but you can just keep throwing up different kick drums, different snares, and you know, find the thing that suits the song. And that, I think for me, is maybe subconsciously a reaction to pitch and intonation. But you know, I tend to take an approach more of finding kind of the best place, like kind of that place a drum wants to live and where it voices itself best, rather than trying to figure out, like, you know, going over and plinking on a piano, trying to, did you put the snare right here? Dang, 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 dang. Like,
right.
That's not really been my thing. But, you know.
Snare drums have always been one of the original plugins. You know, I think of things on sessions where you're like swapping things out, almost like plugins.
Yeah.
And I remember discovering, it's like, oh shit, we can change the snares between songs and see if this one, you know, sounds cool for the next song. That was a sort of an exciting process.
100%. And, you know, and the crazy realization I think we all have early on is, like, how much differently a song strikes you initially just by changing out the snare. It's like shocking.
Okay, so here's the next part of that question. How often do we change out the kick drum?
I don't know. I've made
Not as often, right?
less often. Yeah, it's certainly less often. I've done quite a few records though where we'd have a few kits, like we'd make a conscious decision, like, let's have 2 or 3 kits around, and then let's sort of organize songs, the order of tracking the songs based upon what kit we think will best work on that song. And that's always fun. I think it makes for a more interesting record ultimately, and a record that, for me anyway, I'm more interested, or I'm more apt to sort of listen to from beginning to end of driving across town or whatever, when things are sort of changing, especially drum sounds are changing out from song to song, or, from batch of songs to batch of songs.
Yeah, because if things, I mean, obviously on a tracking session, having everything all set up and ready to go is conducive to getting a lot of songs recorded. But then you have to lean on other things to make each song unique from each other.
Totally, yeah.
Whereas if you can find unique ways to change out the instruments, the drum set included, it can add some variety.
For sure. I mean, I suppose it goes without saying to a degree. As I say all that, I'm reminded though that I'm talking about records that I made years ago, because honestly, because making records today has become a bit more of a not a panic, but like, tracking dates. We're hurrying in a way that I didn't see coming, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Now you're doing a lot of mixing these days as well, right?
A lot of mixing. My career has been kind of funny. Like I haven't really had the opportunity to kind of stick to my guns ever. I'm always kind of just going with the flow, So records, I had a really good run of records in the 2000s. And I guess it was about the time my daughter was born, about 12 years ago or so, that, budgets were starting to get a little bit tighter. And I'd gotten into a habit. I guess that's kind of an easy transition here where I'm talking about, like, I'd had the opportunity to spend years making records where we really had the opportunity to spread out and take the time to really, maybe have 3 drum kits on a project, and we really take the time. And budgets I started seeing budgets that were coming my way shrinking, and it was, I don't know, it was hard. Rather than transition to sort of getting into sort of this new economy of tracking drums for 2 days and whatever, a newer style of making records, I kind of had a moment where not only did I see that writing on the wall, but also my daughter was born, and I started seeing, I wasn't sure I wanted to be spending 12 and 14-hour days in the studio anymore with this little one at home, So totally. I sort of pivoted to, there's a couple of composer friends at the time who were busy, and I sort of pivoted to working on a ton of underscores around 2000 and 8 or 10 or something. And that served me really well. I've spent about 10 years now working on more underscores than records. And then, more recently, maybe in the last year or so, then I've kind of evened out a little bit. And Dolby Atmos came on. I've been spending some more time doing Atmos, and it's just, maybe I'm sort of now half and half, but I really enjoy underscores a lot. It's a very different thing.
So let's go there. Yeah. What is an underscore?
Well, so music for film. And all that incidental music is happening beneath the scene. Not so much the, there's we'll go real basic, right? Like, so in films, there's the source music, which is songs that the music supervisor will license for big montages and stuff off of records. But then there's all that other incidental music everywhere that's sort of playing the scenes, and it's traditionally it's a lot of orchestral music, but I've got good friends and a couple of composers who tend to do more kind of like band instrumentation and kind of more rock band instrumentation underscores or folk music instrumentation. And, so we'll do the occasional orchestral date, but it's a lot of like 3 or 4 guys in a room just interacting, and we'll oftentimes put a band together for that project, for that score. So it's not that unlike making a record, but we're making music for film. So, rather than getting,
that sounds super fun.
Well,
and you get to record that too?
Record it and mix. Yeah. So it's fun. So there's a bunch of good things about it. So the mix is generally in surround, which I love. I love mixing in surround. Mm-hmm. But the tracking dates, it's an interesting thing when you remove the sort of all the coolness and the I guess I'll call it that, the coolness factor of making records, are always trying to like really find a sort of a recognizable sound, let's say, for an album, or find something that can kind of be a signature for that project. Underscores is kind of the opposite, where you really don't want to stick out too much. You just want to play the emotion of the piece. So it's really it's sort of like a load off in a way, to not be so obsessed all day with, like we're saying, the way that the snare drum makes a song feel a certain decade or whatever, but rather just play on emotion, and sort of all conversations lead to, how do you feel? And is this affecting, is this making a listener connect more to the scene or not, or feel the right thing or not?
Yeah.
It's all feeling, it's all gut and heart. And I fucking love it. It's fantastic.
So it makes me think about that difference between band as, artist band versus what you're describing here. In artist band, you begin with this process of, hey, look at me, when you're making music. And in this process, you're like, hey, look over there,
Totally, totally.
Look up on the screen,
Well, and with a band, there's always, in a very positive way, there's a lot of ego on the line always when you're making records with bands. Like you're trying to find identifiable sound, and you're trying to sort of create, oftentimes, a unique universe for this band to represent, let's say. And I guess, like I've already said, it's Underscores. It's absolutely the opposite, and deeply fun, and I find it super, super rewarding and cool.
I guess another analogy for me would be that I was recently invited to be in a wedding band for a drummer here when he got married. And the singer of our little group, most of us had never done a wedding band thing before. We were it was our friend wanted us to do it. And the singer had done that before. And he said to me, he was like, he was sort of downplaying the front manness of what we were doing a little bit. And he pointed out, he's like, nobody's supposed to look at us. They're just supposed to look at the bride and the groom all the time. And I was like, wow, that's really an awesome, different way to think about it. And so it's cool. So what are there any qualities to the music that you're recording that you find help guide the attention towards the film, or things that are likely to distract you and pull you away from the film?
I mean, there's 1,000 tricks. And, the thing that you learn, I think, pretty quickly, composing for picture, or, as the mixer for picture particularly, is that, and it comes from, once you've done a few projects and then gone to the dub stage for the final layback and seen the sort of beautiful chaos that is a re-recording session, it's that thing where, you see a room full of people working really hard to make sure that, oftentimes, like the way that like the ornament on a necklace jingles when, the actress leans over or whatever, is as important to this crew as anything happening musically in that moment. So it's not that the music is less important, but you absolutely have to be thinking about that sort of stuff as in the compositional process, but also definitely when you're mixing as a score mixer. You find yourself aware of 1,000 things that are happening on screen that could be problematic on the stage for the final mix. It's just it's a very, very, very funny mindset to get into. And it's challenging in ways that I would have never guessed, but again, I know I keep saying it, but it is a ton of fun. It can be a ton of fun.
Do you think of it ever as like being the accompanying part of the band, comping while somebody's taking a jazz solo, or everybody just like really tries to get out of the way and support it?
Kind of. And it is, And back to the original point, it's a lot of, you even get into sort of the key that you're in, and the sort of what octave everything is living within. Underscore tends to sort of be able to play a bit louder if things are just a bit darker and a bit lower spectrally. So whether that means a lower key or just sort of voicings that tend to be a little a little more on the left side of the piano. There's, you find yourself sort of being pretty, like really having to sort of choose your battles. Like when you get into things, bright instruments or particularly high notes, you kind of have to choose your battles and be really aware of that just to have a fighting chance of your score playing even reasonably at a reasonable volume in the theater. And that's kind of that.
Well, it's just an extended perspective on arrangement. So arrangement has always been about putting things together in the way that makes a complete whole, and you don't want parts stepping on all over each other. And in this case, some of those parts are bound to be dialogue as well.
Yeah,
right?
And that's the thing, just staying out of dialogue. That's crucial. The whole game, is just staying out of dialogue. So, in making records, you've always got this gigantic, lead vocal up the middle of your track that you're sort of working around. But then, now you're in this new world of underscores where you've got dialogue sort of taking up that same space and that same role that you really need to be conscious of sort of working around musically.
Hey, rock stars. Yeah, you. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? Well, my secret is using Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, Voice Enhancement Assistant, and Nectar to make every episode of this podcast sound great. Right now, you're hearing RX Breath Control, D-Click, D-Clip, DS, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, Neutron EQ, VEA, and Limiting, all from Isotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off or pick up the new Trash Lite along with many of the other free cool plugins over at isotope.com. So what makes up your studio? Give us a little bit of a verbal description of a tour of where you're sitting right now. What are the tools that surround you? What are the things that would let you work on an underscore mix, for example?
Yeah, so I've got I'm pretty connected with. I've been a big fan of Antelope Audios for a long time. I'm a brand ambassador now, and I'm pretty cozy with those guys. So I've got a lot of Antelope stuff here. I've got their clock, of course, and then there's an interface here. I don't want to sound too shilly, but during the pandemic, I was setting up my room. I'd been working in 7.1 on these underscores, right? And I'd used this Martin Sound 7.1 controller for my system. But during the pandemic, I was looking to shift into Atmos, so the Martin Sound didn't have enough channels. So I hit up the Antelope guys, and we kind of went back and forth for a couple of months and built a software solution basically for surround sound into one of these interfaces. So I've got one called the Galaxy 32 here, but it's sort of everything. It's my speaker, it's my recording interface, it's the speaker controller, it's sort of the whole, it's in a way the whole studio. But so at any rate, a pile of Antelope stuff. And then there's this funny company in Utah. They're not funny, but they're called Wilson Audio, and they're an audiophile brand, and they make just ridiculously expensive speakers, right? And I remember it. Okay.
I remember the Wilson Watt puppy.
So Wilson Watt puppies. I haven't met anyone who knows the Watt puppy. So I'm surrounded by
my first job.
Really? Okay. Well, I'm surrounded by Watts. I've got some puppies that I'm not using because I don't have a place to put them. But I've picked up an array over the years of Wilson Watts. That I power with, there's another audiophile kind of classic character named Nelson Pass who designed a bunch of amps. There was a brand that he was involved in called Forte, which was sort of this audiophile stuff gets ridiculously expensive, right? So for guys like us, it's unobtainium. But there was a company that he was involved in called Forte that made some Class A amps that I really had the thing for. So that's my main kind of surround setup are these Wilson Watts and these Nelson Pass designed Forte 1As, they're called. It's a little 50-watt Class A amp, and I'm just crazy about it. I just love the way they sound. They're very, very, it's a very, very fast top end, and I think for underscores in particularly, it's good. It keeps me really, really aware of what's happening up top, and able to sort of create mixes that aren't dark, but like we're saying, can play along with dialogue, can play nicely with dialogue without interfering too much. And so, similarly, ATCs lately have become, very, very popular. And that's what they're, I think, particularly good at as well, is, a lot really, really intense high frequency definition and sort of speed up there. So you can be very, very focused on kind of what you're doing up in the high end.
Right. You want to know what all the details are, because the stuff you're working on may very well play play back in a place where those details are really brought forward.
Yeah, and those details are going to be what gets a cue fired or playing super quiet in the eventual film mix.
Wow. All right. So very briefly, when I moved to Nashville, I came down here to go to recording school. But first, I wanted to live in Nashville and become a resident so I could go to recording school for even less.
Okay, yeah.
So I was working, and one of the first jobs I got is I went into a hi-fi store, and this was just the kind of place that had these Wilson Watt Puppy speakers on display, and they were selling them to doctors and dentists and stuff like that. And I had the job for a week, and I was introduced to these things, and I remember thinking at the time, I was like, I can't believe there's speakers that cost $10,000 a piece. Now, of course, we're like $10,000. Yeah,
so that's just a pair of ATCs. Yeah.
But I remember, and I heard him, and I was just like, wow, this stuff sounds amazing.
I remember the first time I was hearing like audiophile grade stuff and just going, oh God, like I've been sort of sat in front of these kind of dull, I don't want to say dull, but like, studio monitors up until recently have been pretty blunt instruments. And it was a big light bulb moment for me when I first heard, a really good amp playing into a really good speaker, and particular audiophile stuff that's made to just please. It's not really made to be a tool, but it's just made to be, shockingly clear or whatever adjectives you want to put to it. It's really something.
Well, I almost think that the timing of stuff like that, I mean, like, it made sense for audiophile equipment in stores to have this high-end stuff because all it has to do is playback. Mastering rooms had audiophile grade stuff in there because all they had to do was, for the most part, playback. But so much of what we did comes out of the studio that doubles as a tracking space as well. And and then the mixing world evolved out of those kind of studios, I think. You can correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, Todd, but so therefore I think that's why we just got so used to things like NS10s for so many years, because it'd probably be a poor investment decision to put like, $10,000 Wilson Watt Puppies in your tracking recording space when the intern hits the wrong button and feedback blows up the speaker cones.
Or someone drops a mic, or someone hits a kick, someone hits the kick drum and you've got somehow the preamp is cranked, whatever it is. It's one thing to blow out a $300 pair of NS10s, which we've all done. It would be pretty upsetting to blow out an expensive pair of speakers like that.
But like now there is this world of a lot of mixing and a lot of very controlled playback environments because of the home studio situation too. And it makes me think that I wonder if we will see an evolution towards much more hi-fi listening experiences on the, because there's so much back end record.
No, I think you're right. And I think that the rise of the ATC is sort of definitely a part of that. And, for anybody listening, I'll tell you, you can pick up some 90s hi-fi for a song sometimes if you watch Craigslist. I mean, that's all I've done is I've watched Craigslist. And these audiophiles are a fickle bunch. They'll, move on from a thing. These Wilson Watt Puppies were like a real benchmark of audiophilia for 10 years. And I don't think you can, you can't give them away at this point just because they don't have that. There's a spendiness, I think, to the audiophile culture that's part of it, and these aren't a part of that game anymore. So I think a lot of people have lost interest. They're still a great speaker, That's a funny thing.
Well, so what is the Watt? You said you've got a bunch of Watts.
Well, so the Watt Puppy, the top part, you can see one here, right? So that's the Watt, the top part, and the Puppy was the cabinet beneath with the two low frequency drivers.
Right.
So together they were the Watt Puppy. So the
And it's almost like a Oratone speaker or something, a small single cone or what? I mean, as far as what it looks like. Sorry.
No, it's a two-way. It's a focal driver. It's the same focal inverted titanium driver they've been using for a long time. They're still using this driver.
Oh, really? Okay.
And then it's a Dynaudio. It looks. I'm looking at it now. Is that an 8-inch? That's like a. It's either. I think that's an 8-inch driver.
Oh, I see it. I see it. It's the. Yeah, what do you call it? The pylon thing. It makes me think of the Slee stacks back in Land of the
Totally.
Lost.
It does look kind of like they're strangely triangular, and they weigh a ton. I think they're 90 pounds or something. Like my big people come by and I'm always like, hey, pick up that speaker, and they'll grab. There's a little handle in the back, and you just see them like starting to lift, and you literally can't. They're ridiculously heavy. But they're cool speakers. But what else in here? I've got a bunch of Aurora audio stuff too. I've got a little sidecar here that's just everything. I just love the thing with my heart. And then I've got 24 channels of summing, which I don't use much for underscores. Really, just the logistics of it's not going to work. Everything's got to be stemmed ultimately, and it's just a logistical nightmare to do any kind of outboard summing in that world. But I'd fire it up on records. I'll fire this thing up every now and then, and I don't know. We all know the deal. There was that era where outboard summing was pretty important, and it was legitimately a real improvement. And I'm not sure that I feel that way anymore. The math in Pro Tools has gotten pretty good. I think we all agree, and it's kind of less of a thing.
Well, or as artists, it's easier. Our relationship to the gear. We go through these periods where sometimes it's easier to beat up the gear for why our mix doesn't sound good. And then the rest of the time, it's easier to just beat ourselves up for why our mix doesn't sound the way we want it.
Yeah, I suppose.
So let's see, I see you've got like sort of a side screen over there too. Does it look like you have a sloping screen to work from?
Here, I've got another.
What's right in front of you?
This is weird for a podcast, but here, I'm going to switch. So I'll do this. So I got a lot of screens. I got a screen here, and then I've got sort of two screens on either side. But I like to keep it goes back to my tracking days. I like to be able to keep a lot of plugins. I like to see a lot of plugins. I like to keep an eye on the vocal compressor and the stereo bus compressor and the drum compressor. And I like to keep I like to have eyes on things a lot, So even when
do you work off a Mac?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So is there a secret to having multiple screens if you want to work off a Mac? I know that I think I could always have two, but I didn't know if I could have 3 or 4.
I've had 3. So with these new Mac Studios, the new silicone Macs tend to be pretty good about letting you have plenty of screens. I think when the M1 Mini came out, I got that first one, and it had a weird limitation where you could only have 2 screens. But there was a workaround where you could buy these little USB, what was the technology called? It's called Display Link, I believe. I think it's Display Link. So you could find these little USB 3.1 boxes that were a display link to HDMI thing, and you could do more displays. So I've always been a 3 or 4 display guy. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying.
No, I think it's great. I have a small one right on my desk. Yeah. And I love to be able to just like have certain plugins, the compressor, the limiter, whatever thing you want to sort of see all the time or glance over at. Because I think I saw you talking in one of your videos, you were talking about, and hopefully we'll get into some discussions about SoundFlow too, but you were maybe made something that let you pull up plugins easily. And you talked about, back in the day, you glance over at the rack and you see the gear that's available. Yeah. And I agree. Mm-hmm. Well, I agree that it's a great experience when you're in the studio and it's a space and you can look over at things and there's needles and lights moving. If it wasn't for the needles and lights dancing, I don't know if I would have gone into this.
It's all about the lights. Yeah. No, but I think so. You're talking SoundFlow. Yeah, SoundFlow is this little app that a very smart team of guys put together that allows you to script Pro Tools basically. So one of the big uses though, so you'll see my iPad here. I've put together a thing where I've got basically all of my plugins on buttons in SoundFlow, and then they're organized. So EQs, compressors, reverbs, delays, modulation, grit, blah, blah, blah. So, if I want a compressor for a thing, I can go to my compressor page. There's all my compressor plugins there. And then I can just hit the button and whatever, I could have 5 tracks selected in Pro Tools or 1. It will open that plugin on the next available slot on whatever tracks are highlighted. But it's the kind of thing, which this is kind of nerdy, but the thing that I find really interesting, and that's what I was alluding, that's what you're talking about, seeing me say on a video, is that, I'll freely admit, I'll just open FabFilter on everything left to my own devices to avoid scrolling through this. Be like, how you see, you see, like, anymore you see a photo of an engineer working, and he's always like hunched, like leaning forward, squinting.
Right.
This poor guy's just scrolling through like some itty bitty little, scroll down menu of a million plugins, and I don't like being that guy. I don't enjoy it anymore. So there's that aspect of it, but it's also like, like that's what I was saying, is that with having an iPad full of like of being able to see all of these compressors, and there's a fucking million of them there. It does, like, you look at that, and it's just like back in the old days of looking over at a rack of gear in whatever studio you're in, and it would just like trigger a memory response of like, you're looking for a vocal compressor, and okay, I just go to a CL1B just out of habit because that's what I always do.
Feeling blue.
Yeah,
today.
Whatever. But when back in the day, when you look over at a rack of gear, you like, it would maybe trigger something. You'd have a memory response. You'd remember that time that, oh fuck, that BA6A was so badass that time. Maybe let's try that.
Yeah.
Like it makes me try things a lot more often, rather than, like I'm saying, just open a FabFilter because it's my like favorite EQ. I don't have to go scrolling for it. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm very into. So SoundFlow is really, really good at that. But you can also build fairly complex. You can do like real, like deep JavaScript scripting as well. So I'm not a JavaScript.
And has that become your thing? Did you learn how to do that?
There are guys who that's become their thing. Andrew Sheps and Chris Shaw are 2 guys that have, like, I think SoundFlow has inspired them to actually sit down and learn JavaScript. And I think so far I've been lazier than that. I'm not saying I'll never do it, but so far that sounds like too much for me. But I've got a friend who knows JavaScript. So basically I've got a neighbor that's I'll kind of get a script to a place or have an idea for sort of a workflow I want to be able to build and have it fire from a button. And then I've got a buddy I can hit up, and he'll deal with it for me for a couple of drinks or whatever. So I think because I have that crutch, I haven't had to go much deeper, which is great.
I think I remember discovering it and thinking it was very cool. And I like the, this is what I was trying to pull up a friend of mine, Rafael Sepulveda, who lives here in Nashville, also does what you were describing. So just shout out to you, Rafael, as well. He can do those.
Right.
Write Python.
I've seen him,
or not Python. JavaScript.
Yeah, I've seen him. I feel like I've seen that name on SoundFlow message boards and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that stuff is super fun if you get into it. And I think even if you don't learn that language, Todd, I'm sure that you would agree that as engineers, we're always, there's a level of excitement about like getting a little bit ninja with all the stuff we use,
No, totally. Yeah.
So it is really fun to learn these things.
Yeah. And, those of us who came up, I think, in analog studios, there's something pretty unsexy about the computer, the sort of the deep computer wormhole that we're all spending our days in. Like I didn't set out to be this guy, like I loved gear and consoles and all that, tape machines. Some of my funnest memories of the old days is, flying background vocals off of a half inch machine and getting really good at like figuring out the timing to hit the play to get them all to sync. And like, they were like legitimate kind of like primitive skills that were really cool to master back in the day. And, let's not pretend that we're not all just a bunch of apes staring at a computer screen now. And it's a little less sexy, So I don't know. The SoundFlow thing can maybe, it can maybe bring back some of those feelings.
So I'll add to what I think is striking about that. And the plug-in SoundFlow deck, the one that you were showing off and that you use, that's one that you created as well?
There's a couple of different people. So the way that SoundFlow works is that it's an app that's got a bunch of, it's sort of like with these Lego blocks of macros that you can chain together to create larger sort of chains of commands to accomplish things.
And Rockstars, if you're not familiar with the macro, that's sort of an automated sequence of steps. Like it'll do 5 things in a row that you would have otherwise had to do yourself with clicking.
Yeah. What was I going to say?
You're saying it's a sequence of building blocks, macros.
Oh, the way it works. Yeah. But then users can either create a series of events using the built-in macros and then publish them so that other users can use that, or you can actually write scripts from using JavaScript from scratch. But at any rate, however you go about creating your scripts or the workflows you're using, you can publish them on SoundFlow, and then other users can use those things. So to get back to this plugin thing, I forget. There's a couple of people who have made these scripts for opening plugins. Basically, there's I don't even remember the names now, and I don't remember which one I'm using. But basically, I'm just using something that some other user created, and then out of the goodness of their heart, uploaded for all of us to use, all of the rest of us to use. So that's how the plugin thing works.
No matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio all the instruments you need. From drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I love to record real bands in my studio, but then I mix it up with cool sounds from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example, to make my music way more exciting and interesting. Use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off, or download the free gifts waiting for you, like the awesome new Jacob Collier Audience Choir or Complete Start, featuring 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of free samples at nativeinstruments.com. Okay, so one of the frustrations for me in Pro Tools has been that you could kind of favorite like a 1 or 2 plugins, but it never seemed to be an easy way to just have a collection of your 10 ones that you want to use. And then it got organized in terms of like, well, at least it's organized by the name of the manufacturer or the style of plugin or whatever. But inevitably, I've got a lot now. And I think many of us do. And so it becomes, you have to look for it. So it's fun every once in a while to go look because you see all these things. Oh, I forgot I had that. And you go try it. But when you're in a hurry, it's a real pain in the butt.
You've got an idea. You just got an idea of a thing you're trying to
also have to remember. Yeah, you also have to remember the name of the thing to search, which is the quick way. And I was like, I can't even think of the name of what it's called.
I'm telling you, this is the answer. You can have them all on an iPad, you know.
Right. So that's a pretty cool, easy solution. And one of the cool things also about SoundFlow is that you can use old iPads, old iPhones, things that you thought were not very useful anymore in the studio, because now all it has to do is just be a grid of buttons that can just live there.
Yeah, so I had...
so you could have one that's just dedicated.
Yeah, at times I've got a couple of iPads here. At the moment, I've just got the one. But yeah, it's very, very modular and configurable, and it can be whatever you want it to be, is the truth. It's just, SoundFlow itself is just an interesting kind of open format for scripting, and it's unbelievably handy.
Now, this is just top of mind, but do you think the SoundFlow button, it would probably be easy to make one that is just turning the talkback mic on and off during a session?
Yeah. So things like that. Yeah, I mean, there's 1,000 dumb things. Like, you know, you can. There's a lot of solutions. So one major thing. Do you do an Atmos at all at your place?
No, not doing Atmos yet. Just learning about it.
So Atmos, because it's so new, creates a whole slew of problems. But like even like the simple thing of being able to toggle easily back and forth between an Atmos mix and then the original stereo master to compare, which is a very, very integral part of the day, right, when mixing Atmos. That can be pretty complex depending on your speaker controller. So if you have a super robust speaker controller, maybe you'd be fine. But if you, if there's just a million ways to work. But for me, that's another thing that that's another problem that I'm able to solve with SoundFlow. That I don't know how else I would solve it, honestly, without. I don't know. It's sort of like there's a million little things like that come up, particularly with Atmos now, and because it is so new and the tools are a little bit limited, SoundFlow can be a real saving grace for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I don't mean for this to be a big SoundFlow ad. It's obviously it's pretty cool. It's a cool tool.
Yeah.
Well. So, but I do want to point out the things around it that I think of. So there's tools that come along like that one, and then there's one of the things that it might say is like, hey, you can just install this kind of general controls for Pro Tools or whatever app you're using, and so you'll do it, and I will often be impressed with, wow, it's cool. These buttons are set up and it does all this, but I might or might not actually use them all the
100%.
time.
Yeah.
But definitely in the studio, I think for any of us, no matter how we're working, if you do enough of the thing you like to do, you're going to run into something where you're like, God, I just wish I had these three things that don't exist. So it's cool when something comes along that if you just put a little bit of time into it, you can figure out how to solve it and have a quick button.
It's super true. And, I think Yukon has tried to be that solution for people, and a lot of people are great with Yukon, and they're use Yukon every day, various things. And I don't know, I find it isn't that configurable. It's not configurable enough for me, and it is one of those for me. I outside of this artist mix sitting here, like I've worn out the first fader because that's all that's the only one I ever touch, right? But beyond that, I don't find Yukon to be all that interesting just because it's such a closed, it's not really that configurable, and most of the commands that it does, it's like my hand's already on the mouse. I'm just going to do that with the mouse. Like I don't know. I have a hard time. I don't use control surfaces much just because, hand's already on the mouse. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that goes for all of us. And we might complain about having to use the mouse, but then we still use it.
Well, my hand is already there.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about your Atmos setup. I mean, what's exciting for you about working in Atmos now? And was it difficult or easy? Like anything about the process of getting that all set up for yourself?
It's a lot. I mean, I don't think anyone has sort of set up an Atmos system for the first time and just like bought a couple of things and plugged it in and now you're mixing Atmos, like it's like, it's not that kind of thing. Like it's complex. And I think that it's gotten much better. A couple of years ago, it was particularly tricky where, you pretty much had to run the Dolby renderer on a second machine. So suddenly you had two computers you're dealing with now, and figuring out how those two computers were going to hand off 128 channels of audio. That in itself, there's a few ways to do it, none of them particularly sexy or smooth. But it was a lot to set up. It's gotten much better recently, where now we're kind of in a world where you can oftentimes run the renderer on the same machine. I mean, we're just at the cusp of the renderer now being actually living on the stereo bus in Pro Tools, which will probably be a real big help. So the setups are getting simpler. But my journey wasn't much to talk about as the truth, because I'd already been, like I'm saying, I've been mixing surround. I've been doing 7.1 film mixes for so long that Atmos came along, and it really was like, well, so I need to hang some speakers from my ceiling. That's not easy. And then I needed to figure out a new speaker controller that would not only handle more than 8 channels, but I don't know, for some reason.
Right, because when we have a volume knob, we don't even think about it, but that's just 2 channels of audio typically going to 2 speakers.
Easy peasy.
Atmos, it's a lot.
Well, and it's not only all those channels needing to sort of gang all those volumes, but in most surround mixing, most guys I know, I'm sure there are exceptions, but I'll speak for me. I had never really worried too much about per speaker delay in 5.1 or 7.1 as I sort of, as my studio kind of grew doing films. But with Atmos, now you've got speakers in the ceiling. There's just more speakers, and now you're dealing with, there's some best practices coming from Dolby, and per speaker delay became very important suddenly. So having now sorted that out, it is profoundly game changing in a surround array. And I wish I would have dealt with that. I wish I would have been dealing with that years ago. But
can we clarify what you mean by per speaker delay? Are you talking about a time delay?
Yeah, so that's
the sound reaches the speaker.
Yeah, so that's yet another function of then the speaker controller you're going to need for Atmos is that you're going to need to be able to sort of time each speaker's arrival time to your face so that it can image decently. And you're not sort of, you don't have sort of funny phase relationships as you're panning between speakers. So if I remember correctly, I think a millisecond is something like an inch and a half or something. Or maybe is it 0.1? Maybe it's 0.1 millisecond.
Oh, maybe a foot or something like that.
Yeah, so maybe it's 0.1 milliseconds is roughly an inch and a half. It's something like that. But at any rate, it's not that realistic. Like I've got what we'd call an equidistant setup where all of my speakers sort of like it's sort of a circle around me, so that each speaker is, give or take a couple of inches, the same distance to my head. But then it turns out if you really get in there and measure it and get the arrival times perfect, it images a million times better than without. So that's the thing we need to add into now our speaker controller needs. And like I'm saying, there's a lot of people are using, there's a Grace controller that's very expensive, 10 grand, 8 grand or something. And that was too much money for me. So I, with my friends at Antelope, put together kind of a software controller, built it into a few other interfaces, and I'm just doing that. But then, bass management becomes a thing with Atmos where you want to be able to take the maybe 80 cycles and beneath from all your satellite speakers and run that to the sub. So that, and that's the thing. Back in the 5.1 and 7.1 days, I never did either. I just kind of went with it, and kept full range speakers everywhere. But I didn't want to hang full range speakers from my ceiling, because
right
that's
face.
Drywall up there. Yeah, and if it falls on me, I don't want to die. Yeah. So I ended up doing some kind of humble speakers as the ceiling. So then bass management became a thing I needed to deal with. So all that to say, everyone, I think that that's sort of your first big obstacle getting into surround is buying a bunch of speakers. I already had most of them, but then figuring out a speaker controller that's going to be able to sort of manage all of this. And that can be a ton of money, or it can be, there's some software solutions now, the thing we built into the Antelope stuff is really good. There's a thing, a friend of mine, I forget what it's called now. Oh, Sphere. There's a software called Sphere now that you could use a UAD interface or kind of whatever interface you've been using, as long as you've got the 12 to 16 outputs that you need, and you can do speaker delay and arrival time delay and bass management and per speaker trim and all those things in software, and it seems to be fairly stable. So we're sort of like, we're sort of shouting out a bunch of softwares here, but here we are. Sphere looks to Sphere looks to be real cool. I've tested it a bit and it seems usable, and I know a couple people using it. So there's now some cheaper ways to get going in Atmos, far more so than there were a couple years ago.
Right on. Okay, so any other sort of tools that you find really useful? I mean, you said you've got your mouse going. It looks like you got a tape machine next to you. You got a 2-track going.
Yeah, I've had this.
Do you like to mix and match some of the old school gear with the newest?
Well, there's
latest?
Just nothing. I've for 20 years now, I've been saying there's nothing like a JH110. I fucking love MCI machines. I just always have. I grew up with my first studio that I worked in had I grew up on a JH24 basically. And I just love that sound. There's nothing like it. There's a toughness and a kind of fucking, a ballsiness to MCI machines that I just absolutely am a fiend for. So Yeah, I keep this. I've got a JH110 here. It's the A model. It's the one you want, and it's one of my it's one of few things that I'll probably never part with. I just love it.
Do you ever make it out to Nashville? Have you been to Welcome to 1979?
No, I haven't been there. I've never been to Nashville somehow. I don't know how. It's never come up. I don't know why not.
Got to change that.
No, I know. Yeah, I've got a couple new friends out there that I'll come by and see you when I come out as well. I'm dying to get out there. But I've seen the website for Welcome to 1979.
The reason I was bringing up Welcome to 1979 too is Chris Marr refurbishes the MCI machine, so it's like a great resource.
He's the guy. If you post from what I understand, well, actually, I've sold him a couple MCI machines. When you post an MCI machine on Craigslist, I feel like there's an 82% chance that he'll get in touch within 24 hours. It's just, he's just that guy.
He did. I actually sold him my 110 when I sadly.
You had a 110. Okay. Yeah.
I did. I had a JH16 too. And I did a big change and I was just like, it's time to let the tape go. But here's the thing, man. And I also sold my console, which was also an MCI console. But it was
the brown one? The brown one or the black one? Which console did you have?
It was one you've never seen before. It was the Hotel California board from Studio C at Criteria. What? So it was a one-off.
Wow. Damn.
Yeah. It was one of a kind. It really sounded amazing. But what I learned was, or my attitude about it was, I finally realized, I was like, well, if I can responsibly hand these, great pieces of equipment off to new owners, then I'm just accepting that I had my turn with it. It's time for somebody else.
And that's a good way to look at it.
I felt much better.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you put it in the alley, then a pox.
Come on. Yeah. No, this stuff's worth too much to put in the alley anymore, right?
Yeah. All right. So let's see. What else I want to tell you about? There was something you mentioned. You said, you've been working with Antelope Audio, but you also said you were creating some community there. So what does that mean? Is that just sort of like user communities and stuff for those of us who might be using their stuff?
Yeah. And actually, if anyone's listening and you're an Antelope user, particularly an Antelope user mixing Atmos, reach out to me because I'm working to put together sort of a user community. Right now, we've got a little thing going on an app called Signal, which is kind of like WhatsApp, but it's just a little message thread, and it's just there's been a flurry of firmware updates, especially for those of us mixing Atmos on these Antelope interfaces, and I'm just trying to create kind of a positive space for users to just interact, help each other out with particular Atmos setups because it can be pretty complex, and just create a little community, with amongst Antelope users. So far, there's about a dozen of us in it now, and it's been real cool. As I think coming out of the pandemic, this will may become a bigger kind of conversation than it needs to be. But like coming out of the pandemic, I feel like first of all, 10 years ago, we all sort of started going to the studios less and less and interacting with each other less and less, and kind of became these autonomous creatures in our garages or side rooms or whatever converted spaces that most of us work out of now. And I don't know. I just feel like any opportunity to sort of put together, to sort of assemble and hang and be like-minded, I just find it so lovely, Yeah. So there's a group of guys, or a group of people, I should say, in LA that Atmos mixers that we all kind of Matt and Will put together sort of an Atmos group that I got into. I was lucky enough to kind of get into early, and it's now grown to a bunch of users, and it's so wonderful, just to have a bunch of like-minded people being helpful, navigating Dante problems and navigating new technologies and that whole thing. And I'm sort of trying to, I guess, in a way, I'm trying to do a similar thing with Antelope users, and I just love the idea of community, and I feel like there's been less of that in the pro audio world. Coming out of the pandemic, particularly, there's been less chance for interaction. I just I just want to interact. You know what I mean? I don't want to seem thirsty or needy,
totally.
but God, I'm looking to interact a little bit. I miss my friends. I miss shooting baskets at Sunset with whoever was in Studio 3, and if we can.
I've been there. Well, Sunset always had plus it had the shared bathroom. It was it felt like a high school bathroom you walk into and you're standing at the urinal next to Rick Rubin going hey, man.
Same at Capitol, same at Conway. I mean, it was, I miss running into friends or running into people that you never met, but the 3 records they've made, and you just little high five moments used to be so rewarding and nice, and they're farther and fewer between, and that's a shame. So I'm trying.
Well, that's all right. That's why we're trying to bring people together at Recording Studio Rockstars, and love going out to NAMM and other events like that. Welcome to 1979 does an annual event here. They'll put 60 people in the studio. Just to talk about making records for a weekend. So I encourage everybody to find stuff like that and go join it when you
100%. And younger, I think there's a lot of younger engineers sort of coming into the business now that maybe didn't come up. If you never had a chance to sort of experience that commercial studio thing and that kind of camaraderie, of hanging out with it in a 3 or 4 room facility and bumping into friends and that whole thing. If you've only been an autonomous creator, I can't say enough. Reach out, and you can find old guys like me and old guys like us. I'll say that we're pretty quick to I think give back and want to interact with especially younger creators, because it's important. And I think that a lot of us have sort of an empty spot where a lot of that interaction used to be. I know I do, and I love any opportunity. I'd jump at any opportunity I get to sort of be a part of community or sort of create community or whatever.
Cool, man. I just dropped a marker for our break because that's perfect timing. But quick question for you. You said Matt Wallace, and I wanted to make sure I dropped a marker. I didn't know if you meant Matt Boudreau.
Nope, Matt Wallace.
Okay, great. Cool. Never mind. I will correct that. Because I was thinking about the
Matt Boudreau's in the group.
Group. He's in it. Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought.
The beginning of that group was sort of Matt.
My job is to take notes and look out for everybody's back all the time. I'm like the assistant.
No, I'll say some horribly stupid shit. It's good. It's good someone's listening because,
Let me make a note.
Now, the beginning of that Atmos group was Matt Wallace and Brad Wood. What's his name? I'm blanking on the dude's name. What's well, it was 2 or 3 people, and then Ken Sluter and Brad, I think, invited Ken Sluter and I in, and then it kind of sort of
it's got
growing
the greatest
from
name. I mean, damn.
The damn.
In 2024, Atom Audio will celebrate 25 years of researching, developing, and manufacturing industry-leading monitoring solutions in Berlin. To mark this milestone, our friends at Atom Audio are unveiling a very special limited edition series of monitors that will look gorgeous in your studio and sound as awesome as your music. Introducing the Arctic White A4V and A7V series, available for a limited time to pro and home studio owners like yourself. The clean, glossy white finish exudes a decadent feel and will stand out in any studio or in-home audio system. Featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design and customizable speaker voicings, the Arctic White A4V and A7V have the full specifications of the original design. Plus, with SonarWorks integration for automated room correction, you can fine-tune your monitors to your control room's acoustics. Plus, with SonarWorks integration for automated room correction, you can fine-tune your monitors to your control room's acoustics. Atom Audio's commitment to delivering professional-grade, high-fidelity sound to studios worldwide has made these monitors a perfect fit for Grammy-winning producers in both pro and home studios for a quarter of a century. Now you can bring that beautiful high-fidelity sound to your own productions and make your studio look as amazing as your music. Don't miss out on the new limited edition Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a short time with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. I am super impressed with iZotope Ozone. I've been mastering many of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy to get a fantastic sound. The built-in mastering assistant helps by measuring the mix and suggesting all the settings needed for a professionally mastered result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want. Using simple yet sophisticated modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, you simply adjust the settings to your own taste and it sounds incredible. And the magic of master rebalance means that you can reach into your mix at the mastering stage and manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums. Amazing. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now when I send off the masters for approval, the band absolutely loves the way our records sound thanks to iZotope and Ozone. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Ozone or other tools like RX and Voice Enhancement Assistant, or grab any of the cool free plugins like the new Trash Light over at iZotope.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Todd Burke, joining us from his studio in Los Angeles. And his studio is affectionately called The Listening Room, LA.
That's what I'm...
Is that your studio right now?
I called it Lime Street for a long time. I've recently moved into this listening room idea, mainly because I'd like to start offering it up as a Dolby Atmos playback spot for friends. And nice. I kind of see a thing... I won't say problem, but it is a bit of a problem. There's, I'm seeing people mixing Dolby Atmos in headphones and then, we're a lot of us are starting to see records going up on Apple Music that sound like maybe somebody mixed it in headphones and never really checked it in speakers. So I've changed the name of my studio to Listening Room LA, and I'm trying to sort of put it out there as a spot that you can book hourly and just to come in and finish off a mix in speakers,
Yeah, I've definitely heard people talking about that, and I know other Atmos mixers who have their own system, but they'll still go to another studio to spot check it again, just make sure it translates and all that. Which again, it's a new modern complex, complex, because recording has always had a level of complexity. And then it becomes simple, and then there's a new thing.
Yeah, this is particularly complex, though, somehow, the Atmos thing. There's a lot to it, Yeah.
Hey, come on, man. What about syncing two tape machines with the timeline links?
You know what the funny thing about those days? I never really figured out I will admit, I never figured out the links. There was always an assistant to deal with that. The studio I came up with, we only had one tape machine. And then as I started working on bigger projects and whatever, it was the assistant's problem then. So I never had to deal with the links, but there's some part of me that wishes I could have had that arm wrestle. I feel like maybe I missed out on something.
I only did it because a particular record finally required it. Like I had to learn how to sync up multiple machines, and it was totally unnecessary for us to have done any of that either. Like it was one, there's a thing about audio technology, especially whatever equals throwback technology at the time you're making the record, whatever reminds the artist of something that previously happened, that they're like, we got to use analog, or we got to use the old Akai sampler, or we can only use the legit MPC or whatever it is. And those can be frustrating, but they can also be golden opportunities as the engineer. You're like, finally, I'm actually, my pay for today is to spend all day figuring this thing out.
And it's a new challenge, and let's not pretend that we all didn't get into this just for sort of the technical challenge of it. I think most of us are wired very much that way. Like we like to figure out how things work. We all
got into it because of the wire recorder, right? So
totally.
There you go.
Yeah,
I've
got a wire recorder back here actually that works.
Do you really?
I've got a bunch of old stuff. I've got a great. I've got a couple of Reco Cut. Or no, I sold my Reco Cut, but there's a thing. I think in the 1930s ish, there were these transcription recorders that cut to disc, but that was like I think these discs. I think there's actually they're kind of a steel plate with then some material. It's almost like Bakelite or something on the outside, and you can cut records, mono records.
It's like an Edison cylinder or something like that.
It's a platter. It's like an LP, like a platter, but you can record it. They're recorders. So kind of around the same time as wire recorders. And I've got, there's a company called Meisner that made these little suitcase recorders that cut to 78 RPM disc. And they're cool as shit. They sound amazing. I've had them for years and years. I've used them on records maybe twice in all this time, but like, I don't know, they're very neat. They're tube, of course. They sort of tick all the boxes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have an old Webcore tube mono reel-to-reel tape machine. And I did some recording, actually. I took it and set it up with my mic and preamp and recorded a jazz band and just at a friend's house, and it sounded so cool.
Yeah.
My other friends that always, I don't know if you ever felt this way, but I've always had a friend or friends that could listen to something I did and they just like could immediately call whether it was cool or not cool, I might be focused on like the latest computer recording, but then I go record something on a cassette and play it for them. They're like, now that sounds cool. Right. And then I go listen to them like, hey, you're right. That does sound cool. So did you ever get the wire recorder working?
So the problem with the wire recorders, they always play back, but I think, from what I understand, it's like a crystal mic, the transducer for the recording head. It's crystal technology. So it works like a crystal mic. So it's like a puck of tightly packed, like crystal sand, essentially.
Granules. Or
yeah, but they tend.
Old telephones were that way.
Yeah,
too.
but I've never found a Webster wire recorder that records. The things always come unpacked, I think, is what happens, or something happens where they just don't. It's not packed tightly enough, and they don't record. So I've got one that plays beautifully, and I actually on eBay I found once. I've got like 20 or 30 wires that are these orchestral recordings that someone made off the radio in the 30s or whatever. And they're cool as hell. And they just got this weird kind of squeaky, kind of a squeaky artifact to it. It sounds so incredible. There was some move.
So it actually, it encodes the magnetic flux onto a wire.
And it's thin, but it's like fishing line. It's so thin. It's really, really thin wire. But yeah, it was a precursor to tape, magnetic tape, and it's the same idea, right? Like you're just aligning magnetic flux on a medium, but in this case, for some reason, someone had this idea of what is this unbelievably tiny metal wire, which when the tape flies off a tape machine, it kind of goes everywhere, and it's one thing you can kind of wheel it back together easy enough. That happens with the wire, and it just turns into knots, like tiny little knots. So you're like trying to unknot this itty bitty little wire to get it put back together. It's just the worst. It's the worst. There's no question why this didn't last more than 10 years or so, because it's nonsense.
That's hilarious.
They're cool though.
All right. So other questions I want to ask you. One of the things you're doing is the RecordBetter project. So I wondered if you wanted to give a shout out to what that is. Yeah,
RecordBetter. I don't know what to do. I'm trying to figure out what to do with RecordBetter. During the pandemic, I had this idea that, and I think we kind of touched on this, that, there's all these sort of new creators coming up that never had a chance to sort of like hang out at a commercial studio and rub elbows with, older engineers, and kind of that sort of mentorship culture that we all came up in and kind of took for granted has been just entirely, I guess, stifled is the word. Like it's just not. It's that sort of giving back of all this knowledge that was given to you so freely. It's kind of like there's kind of like a big roadblock. Like it doesn't happen as much anymore, and it's a problem. So, when I came up, I had mentors like Sylvia Massey was a big one. I had a few friends that really like legitimately took me under their wing and initially and just were like, look, people help me come up, I'm going to help you come up. And it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so I feel like I want to give that back somehow, and I got a little bit obsessed with it, honestly, during the pandemic. And I basically made a series of videos. I made a kind of a fundamentals course of recording fundamentals with some friends of mine, with Ken Sluter, who you mentioned earlier, and a buddy named. Have you had Husky Huskolds on your show?
Yes.
Maybe a while back.
In fact, I think he was the one who had me switch to Spotify.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sounds about right. But those guys, there's a really cool guy named Lawrence Malchos, who is the kind of the chief engineer / tech at East West, got involved. And, we just got together and made a bunch of videos about recording basics. And I, at the time I was thinking, there's all these how-to videos online and all these Grammy Award winners talking about how to EQ a kick drum, but not a lot of solid information on like the hows and the whys and the whats and the like real basic stuff,
Mm-hmm.
So that was, we'd made recordBetter. And I haven't.
And you remember going to school at Crass, where like probably similar to me going to school at MTSU, the first classes were like, here are pickup patterns of a microphone. Here are the different kind of microphones. Here's how it all works. And I was so fascinated to learn that stuff.
This simplest stuff, like this is an equalizer. This is, this is how it works. And then, and then that can quickly kind of spiral into this is the way, phase problems are introduced with equalization and different types of equalizers for less. But, if you sort of skip that real fundamental stuff and just go straight to like, well, so-and-so said to do this, and then you do that and don't get quite the result that you were hoping for, where do you go? Like what, so then I guess you just watch more videos of so-and-so doing a thing. And that it seems to me to be kind of a funny loop. I'm imagining that can be a funny loop to get in,
Yeah.
So at any rate, we made this fundamentals course. I'll be super honest. I don't have the money to promote it. I don't know how to promote it. I really don't know what to do with it. But at the moment, I've got this recordBetter project, which is, it's just that it's 5 or 6 hours of videos going through the fundamentals of stuff. Admittedly, during the pandemic as well, I think there was sort of less of that kind of media out there as well. Like it's gotten nearly cringy, I think, sometimes, the amount of just like now creators on social media, like, recorded, getting with all the newest tips and tricks and all that. Like, so I don't know. I don't know what to do with it, to be honest. I made all this content.
You got free promo right now, so can the rock stars go check it out if they want?
Yes. So it's recordbetter.com. And I think at the moment I've got it set up on a like pay what you can kind of situation where you can subscribe to the entire fundamentals course for, I think the minimum is $50, but it's a kind of pay what you can kind of thing. And cool. It's worth checking out. And I think especially, if you're just getting into this or you're maybe find yourself in that kind of loop that I'm talking about of like, oh, well, so-and-so does it like this, but I do it like that, and I'm not getting the same result. Okay. So let's go back a few steps. And this is one way that, that I'm trying to create for people to go back to the beginning and try to start at the beginning,
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all crave captivating sounds that elevate our music to the next level. That's why Native Instruments is your ultimate creative companion, offering a vast library of sounds for your studio. Whether you're crafting hip-hop beats, indie pop melodies, classic rock anthems, serene meditation tracks, pulsating dance floor hits, or intricate orchestral compositions, Native Instruments' complete bundle has you covered. From drums, loops, and beats to dynamic synths, lifelike strings, and vintage instruments like electric bass, guitars, and keys. The possibilities are endless. Use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off, or download the free gifts waiting for you, like the awesome new Jacob Collier Audience Choir and Complete Start featuring 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com. Yeah, so rock stars, if you are interested in learning the fundamentals of recording, or you're at that point where you do really want to understand it, go check it out, because Todd does know what he's talking about. You're gonna learn from somebody who, it does the old school and does the most modern shit you can get into right now. And again, go click through in the show notes and listen to his discography, and you'll be like, oh yeah, okay, cool. This stuff sounds fucking great. So I'd like to learn how to make stuff sound great. So
yeah.
Shout out
I
to you.
appreciate that. Yeah. And again, like it's a little bit awkward in that I'm not really sure what to do with it. But honestly, it's a bunch of media that me and some friends put together, and we legitimately made it with our hearts kind of coming from a good place, So we'll see what happens.
Cool. Yeah. Another thing that you mentioned in your bio is you talked about doing a little bit of dabbling in mastering. And so I wondered if you wanted to talk about your experience mastering, some of the stuff you've learned, and just some of the tools that you find really useful when you're mastering a record.
Yeah, I mean, mastering, I think it's kind of like everything where, years ago there was such a barrier. It wasn't that many years ago that, if you want, there were people with $10,000 equalizers and $20,000 compressors and like that, there was a real barrier to entry to get into mastering and to be able to legitimately master a record. And, like that is kind of the beauty of this modern recording age that we're in, is that that's kind of over, like the plugins have gotten very, very good. I just downloaded there's now did you pronounce it Maselic? That, that black equalizer with it's like a 5 or 6 band.
Ooh, I don't know.
At any rate, it's one of my favorite mastering equalizers. But it's unbelievably expensive, and there've been a couple of attempts at software versions of it that have kind of fallen short. But there's now one that's just fantastic, right? I think it's $50. So what used to be, a whatever $5,000 to $12,000 outing to have this tool at your disposal, it's now, next to free. And so I guess with that barrier removed, I think a lot of us find ourselves then, taking a crack at things that we may not have years ago, like mastering. And, I don't mean to infer that there's not great value in getting another sort of take on your mix. And, I've got a couple of mastering engineer friends that when there's budget for that, it's freeing and liberating and just awesome to get another pair of ears on a project, but, oftentimes there's not budget for that. And because of that, I've more and more find myself mastering the stuff when I'm mixing, and I enjoy it. I really like it, and it's mainly just that the tools are accessible now. And, I'm lucky enough to have a couple sets of speakers here that I am more confident in than I've ever been, and that's it. Do you remember back in the days?
Are you mastering your own stuff more often, or are you mastering other people's projects? I'm mastering
other people's projects here and there. I'd love to do more of that, but mainly stuff that I'm mixing, I find myself mastering.
Yeah, and I think that's a common thing for us. So I think you're speaking to our audience who totally get that.
There. But
So talk a little bit about that. Like, what, for you personally, where does the mix stop and the mastering begin? And what are some common moves that you are like, well, this seems like I seem to be doing this after post-mix. It's common for me to do this next move as part of the mastering of the same song I mixed. Because, I think sometimes we think about it, it's like when you're trying to understand this stuff at the outset, you're like, well, why don't you just do all that in the mix,
right. I'd find it really beneficial to split it up into kind of two processes. I am a real stickler for kind of old school gain staging and kind of level consciousness. So I sort of work at -18 dB full scale or +4 or whatever you want to call it. I very much stay there throughout the entire process. And it's an arguable, now with 32-bit floating point, whatever, it's the Pro Tools mixer sounds, you can drive the Pro Tools mixer awfully hard and you don't get that boxiness we used to, but I'm still pretty scarred from those days. And I'm just, because that was brutal. And I don't know, it's just always, I just still work that way. Maybe it's mostly habit. But I feel like plugins, particularly like UAD compressor plugins and stuff, they're modeled on analog gear. And I just think that Fairchild sounds best when you hit it, when it's seeing +4-ish level or -18-ish level coming in. Like all the knobs look about right and everything acts the way I expect it to act. And, I don't know how to sort of operate a mix. It might not even be that it's wrong. I just don't know really how to function if I'm mixing up in those, up at just like, fire, if my mixer is just on fire, and I see that with people, and there are people making great records with just everything on fire all the time. All I'm saying is I don't know how to do that, and it seems foreign, and it just everything looks funny to me. So at any rate, all that to say, I really do keep things at +4-ish, -18-ish, all the way through the mix process, and it just works. It's just what works for me, and then
I think it's worth breaking that down a little bit more for the Rockstars too, because some of these things we came up with that thinking, so we understand it, we take it for granted. But just to reiterate what you're saying, so in an analog studio, you would have to be conscious of the level going in and out of all these different pieces of gear.
You had a VU meter.
And so you'd want to have like a working 0 level. What's 0 VU is +4 dB, whatever.
Yeah, it's plus, you call +4. It was 1.23 volts. If you want to get like that about it, you can measure it a bunch of different ways. But like 0 was 0. There was a 0 that we were always aiming for.
Right, and be more than 0 would be louder. Less than 0 might be quieter. However you want to look at it. But in plug-in world, because you're able to put things on the track, I think it's easy for us to forget that this plug-in might have an appropriate level in to it for it to function the way that it's designed to do. And if you bring in something and it's way hotter, way louder than that 0 level, maybe the plug-in does or doesn't work the way you would expect it to.
Yeah, and I think particularly with emulations, like the UAD emulations, I mean, look, when you put an 1176 on a thing, you're sort of like aware and conscious of that little bit of harmonic distortion that it's going to add. Like you make those decisions based upon the kind of character that a piece of gear is going to bring to a signal.
Yeah.
And that's the same with plugins. And I guess, for me, and maybe it's just because I came up analog, what I expect a thing to sound like and what I expect it to do, it does that at a particular, if I'm feeding at a particular level, So there is no right, there's no right or wrong. There's that caveat goes in out of the gate. But for me, I find that, I find myself just keeping everything kind of in old school +4 levels, which in Pro Tools is like -18, which isn't but halfway up the meter, like it doesn't look that impressive if you get too visual about it. But that's that's how us old guys, that's how the graybeards work, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, and an analogy for me sometimes is thinking about guitar signals. Electric guitar goes into a pedal, and the pedal goes into the next pedal and the next pedal, and that goes into the guitar amp, and you get a cool sound that you like. And you can screw that sound up pretty easily if you're not thoughtful about how you do it. But sometimes I plug a guitar in and use a software amp in my session, and then I think, well, wait a minute, now the guitar is going into a preamp, and how loud should the preamp be to go into the interface to hit this guitar amp plug in? And so it's just a reminder to us, not that there's a right and wrong way, but to just be conscious that you need to think about this stuff. You need to
I'm all about.
You might need to know if you're maybe causing a problem for yourself, or you might need to know that you don't need to worry about it at all. But just know that it's there.
Well, and sort of right or wrong aside, I feel like predictability. I think that being an engineer and sort of like establishing a skill set at this has a lot to do with predictability. And you have some success one day getting a certain sound, or like getting the drums to do a certain thing on a particular mix. And, if you're going to have any chance at duplicating that later or doing that again, like I feel like there's kind of two ways to work. You can just sort of ham-fistedly turn knobs until shit sounds good and hope for the best. And I know those people, and some of them are geniuses. It isn't wrong. I choose to go, but I've got a mindset of going the other way though. And that's of sort of establishing establishing sort of a way of working that's predictable and it's repeatable. And when I do have success or find something that works, or get to know a new plugin even, and kind of what it brings emotionally to an instrument, let's say, the only way to file that away as a thing I can duplicate for next time is if I know not only the plugin that I opened and like what the GUI looked like, but also like how I drove it and why, you know? So it's a lot about predictability and being consistent for me, just so that I can, I mean, to really get goofy about it in a way, just so that I feel like I'm always evolving, you know? Because I feel like if you're always just turning knobs until it sounds good, then, you know, you're going to have success, but it's going to be kind of you're probably going to be kind of hit and miss.
Right. And then you can't, and then your track record will be you'll be waiting around too long for successes.
Maybe.
And it gets harder to dial things in.
Well, and in my mind, it would be hard to sort of go into a project with real self-confidence. You know, like I like to think that every day I sit down to mix a song, I sort of learn something, or I learn something about a piece of gear, or I find an interesting use of a plugin or whatever. And as I file that away kind of into my bank of things that I know and like and do, it is that predictability that makes that a thing that I can file away and duplicate next time, you know?
Yeah.
So
then it becomes a useful.
Yeah. And that was, and back in the day, you know, the tape machines and analog consoles, you kind of had to be at 0 VU all the time, or the track would be noisy. There'd be too much tape hiss, or you'd blow up or the track would distort, or like, and you could do all that for effect. You could distort for effect, certainly, but you kind of had to. The tape machine was such a limited medium dynamically that you had to be at 0 VU all the time. So I don't know. In getting into that habit from working to tape, that predictability became a part of the day, and I think it's important. It can be important.
Well, that was a fun part of the tracking to the analog to the JH16 was the band's playing, and I'm just my eyes are just constantly glued on the tape level meters, just like trying to, in between takes, trying to bring things up or down and hit that sweet spot of 0. But then the big punchline for every session was there might be a take where it just blasted the meters on the tape machine, and then we do one more and I just nail the levels. Yeah. And it was always the one that blasted the tape machine that was the better
every
take.
time. Well, but then you probably got to like all that saturation and stuff, and it probably turned out fine because that's how it always turned out fine somehow. I always was conscious of the reverse of that, where like you'd get all your sounds together on the first day and get all your levels going, and then the band would go out and they'd decide to do just like a soft song, the first song, and go out and play one down and just fucking kill it. But you were just barely moving the meters, and we'd just be sitting there. You'd be like you'd get into the first chorus, and your meters were just barely moving, and you just have your head in your hands at the console, just praying that they fuck up. Just fuck up, because I need to click every mic pre up 2 clicks here. Just stop playing. Right. Just fuck up. And they wouldn't, and they'd kill the take, and they'd come in for a playback, and then you'd hit play on the tape machine,
crank the speakers up, and it's all hiss.
Is it a little? Why is the studio's hissy? I'm like, yeah, I don't. Yeah, maybe it must be the studio. But tape machine must be. We should probably get the tech in to look at this tape machine. It's too hissy, right? Meanwhile, your meters aren't even moving.
And Rockstar's RX wasn't invented yet. Isotope RX, it didn't exist.
No RX, no. But honestly though, like we're making fun, but like that's the world a lot of us came from, us older guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just out of, it isn't even about being habit. Like it's just you had to be consistent. Your levels had to be right, or you were making bad recordings and you weren't going to get hired next time. There was no.
Yeah. Well, you remind us of a thing that always existed. Your studio was always suspect until the band decided that they liked what was playing out of the speakers. And everything's just great from there on out in the session. But at the beginning, it was just like, like you're right. They come in and they might say like, I don't know, this studio, blah, 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 blah. Or like it would be, the thing would be like, my amp never buzzes at home. And you're just like, oh God, please don't accuse us of bad electrical power now or whatever.
Have you worked in LA much?
Yeah, some. Yeah, I worked at Sunset and other home studios.
Sunset wasn't bad. Sunset Sound Factory. I spent years and years and years and years in Studio B there. And at 5 o'clock, between 5 and 6 every day, you'd start getting like the taxi dispatcher would start coming through every guitar amp in the building, and there was nothing you could do. It was unbelievable. We tried everything. We tried the chicken wire thing. Like, there's that.
You called Buckethead and had to bring in his Faraday cage?
Everyone talks about Buckethead when you talk about that. He really did that, though, apparently. I don't know Buckethead.
That's what I heard. That's why I didn't work with him.
We did it. We got a big roll. We sent out for a big roll of chicken wire once from Home Depot. We got a few different types of chicken wire. That shit doesn't work. There was nothing. We tried everything. Nothing worked. Unreal.
You're like, that's the wrong percentage of aluminum substrate.
Yeah, I think we need the denser chicken wire because
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. We're in the Bible Belt, of course, so we got holy roller preachers would come through the guitar amps, when things were right. So one of the records, we've waited till now to start mentioning your records, but Como de Allstars, the Greyboy Allstars, great sounding record. Is that one of your mastering projects, one that you mixed and mastered?
Yes. Yeah, it would be. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those guys.
Okay, so
go ahead.
Really cool stuff. There's a lot of great sounding records in your discography, so thank you for sending that over. This particular one, awesome, kind of saturated Latin funk groove. And I just wondered if you wanted to talk about your thoughts on when in a process you impart so much character into a sound and a record. Do you feel like it happens in the tracking stage or the mixing stage, or is some of that happen in the mastering stage too?
Yeah, I mean, it's all of it, you know how it is. It starts with microphone choices, of course. And that record in particular was a lot of old microphone, crunchy old microphones. And we were kind of going for a real throwback, kind of gritty, crunky, thinnish, just like a real throwback kind of retro thing, So that's a ton of like old AKG mics, some ribbon mics in there, but particularly like that record was a lot of like, remember like RE15s and RE16s and all those little thin silver.
I got a pair of RE16s and the RE10.
The RE10. And then there was the one called a 635, which I think was like an RE15.
Yeah. That's the Omni.
Yeah.
I've got those too.
I love all those microphones. And they're so instantly kind of, I hate to say retro, but like it just sounds kind of old and not lo-fi, but definitely not hi-fi,
Right. So let's keep talking about that. So these are all dynamic mics, Rockstars, that you mentioned so far. And when you talk about that, like, it's like, as you say, it's not necessarily that you're trying to lo-fi as in like when you put a distortion plugin on and you're just screwing up the sound, but dynamic mics let go of some things that condenser mics can present that are challenging, like extended deep low end
and
or
top
like
end as well,
crispy,
right? Yeah,
clear top and stuff, right?
Yeah, and they're slower, So like sometimes I think about fidelity in terms of kind of like oral speed almost, or like the if you think of condenser mics as like, oh, what would be an analogy? Like if you think about a snare drum, like a snare drum with a really thick, thuddy head versus a timpani. This is this drummer coming out in me. I'm sorry, but sometimes I'll think about like a U47 or like a real hi-fi condenser mic. It is more sort of like a timpani character to it, where it's very fast. It reacts very quickly, and it's able to sort of like capture all of that transient on notes and all of that, like the hair on the violin bow, like just all that character. Where then
right.
Like some of the mics we're talking about now, these kind of like older dynamic mics, they just aren't capable of capturing some of that stuff. But it's not the same as just putting a low pass filter on. It's a totally different thing. There's a speed characteristic to the transient, I think, is one of the main things that really, really makes it sound. And old is a terrible adjective to use, but just less like cassette versus CD or something, right? It's just a slower medium. There's less transient information, less hair there's less hair on the arm, let's say, and it's just simpler.
But it's easy to say that, but we never think that. We would just listen and we just appreciate it. I mean, you might think that now, but when you first liked it, so some things that come to mind. I remember hearing somebody describe, I think it was Western symphonic music, and it was a violin player, and they were with somebody in China or somewhere and hearing it for the first time. And the reaction of this other person hearing a Western instrument was like that there was so much noise in the instrument, which surprised me. It was just like because of the bow and everything. And like it struck them that it was potentially distracting and like the essence of the sound was in there somewhere. And that just popped into my head because that in a way is what you're describing. It's like all these details that come through a condenser mic, you might consider them distractions from the fundamental quality of the tonality of the instrument that you really want to hear, and that slower dynamic diaphragm. So maybe explain to the rock stars what you mean by slow. What are you describing that's slow?
I mean, I guess slow meaning a microphone's ability to capture the transient or capture all of the nuance, but
it's the diaphragm, right? It's literally, it's a sort of a heavy, clunky diaphragm.
Yeah, and it's trying to, the diaphragm's got to push a magnet, so it's just, it's like there's work having to happen there, like, God.
Who is the famous Greek story, Sisyphus or whatever, who had to push the rock up the hill?
No, but it is it is like that. But, so a lot of energy is lost, but in that process, energy is lost. And in particular, the high frequency energy, I think, is lost. But, in terms of that Greyboy stuff, we did make a lot of choices in gear, and very often it wasn't going for fidelity ever. It was going for like vibe and attitude and it is, as much as it is really easy to just open a decapitator on everything and put the low pass filter down a bit and then add a little grit, and that's a sound that is cool and it does approximate a thing very, very well that is instantly rewarding with this kind of, with like funk and this kind of music. But you can also make different mic choices and different mic pre-choices and accomplish sort of a similar thing, or maybe something that's even got more character and more kind of vibe than just that.
Okay, so let's see. If you're using dynamic mics and you're recording a band, are there any particular miking choices as the recording engineer, like where to put the mic and how to think about good ways to mic up drums, for example, or other instruments that are worth giving a shout out?
Yeah, I mean, drums in particular, if someone rolls in with a Fender Deluxe, you're going to make a microphone choice, and then you're going to choose to put the microphone near the middle of the cone or near the outside for a little brighter or darker. It's a pretty simple, but the point being, it's a relatively simple. There's not a lot of decisions there, and you'll be relying on success you've had in the past, like I'm saying, and you'll probably have your favorite microphone at the moment for guitar amps, and you'll go there. But drums are a totally different thing, where you really have, there's just so many options and ways to mic a drum kit. I think on that record, I think there aren't but 4 mics probably on the drums on that record, if not 3. In fact, it's just a U47. The kind of the real classic thing that I love for a project like that, where you're going for kind of a throwback thing and you're trying to get a kind of a far more of a like 60s feeling than a 80s or 90s one. My kind of go-to is a U47 up top or a clone, and then something on the snare, probably an RE something or other, RE15, RE10, something. And then something down low, and it maybe not even right on the kick drum or in the kick drum, but just something down low to get kind of the bottom, and it'll be somewhere near the kick drum probably, but if you've got a D15 around, that can be a lot of fun, or an RE20, or RE20s are funny in that they don't have, like when you talk in an RE20, it's really, like it really gets all that chestiness. But I feel like they're really good. They make great 200 cycles, but not a whole lot of 60 in RE20. So that's an interesting way on a kick drum to kind of, even a kick drum that's tuned down pretty low, to kind of get it up in the spectrum a little bit, and maybe let it be a little, just kind of roll off some of that extreme low end and let the kick drum live more in a 200-y place, which in my mind does make it just inherently then registers a little more retro.
And 200 is a place to think about the bottom of a snare drum too, in a way. So it's almost like you're thinking about bringing the kick up into the snare, the snaratory. I just invented that word.
I like snaratory. Yeah.
Where they're working together, maybe that's a way to think about it. I mean, it's funny, it's like there's nothing stupider than talking about frequencies all day, but at the same time, it's fucking great to talk about frequencies when you're rediscovering it in your own thinking.
And it's hard not to, and there's no other way to really think about the spectrum, like this frequency spectrum. If you don't talk in numbers, and I guess you can talk in adjectives, but it's pretty vague. You get into like boxy and boomy, and there's like a dozen adjectives, but they're pretty fucking vague, and you could take it a few different ways.
You're almost done with this mix, Todd, but can you make it a little more blue?
Oh, I hate that. Yeah, that's hard. But I'm trying to think.
Okay,
that record, it started with microphones. The studio we cut it in was sort of perfect for that kind of thing. It was linoleum floors and a lot of wood, a lot of wood on the walls and a lot of linoleum on the floor, which is just inherently a sound. It's a particular sound that I love.
What studio was that?
So that band is, the guitar player in that band is a friend of mine named Mike Andrews, who is the composer I have been working with for years and years. So he has this great studio. It's a semi, it's probably more than semi. It's a mostly private studio of his, just because he uses it all the time. He can't get into it because he's always working. But we built it like 3 years ago now or so. And we really we looked at Sunset, a couple of our favorite rooms in town, Sunset and Capitol B, and, tried to take as many kind of clues from those places as we could, and put it together. And it's basically, it's all stained, all the walls are stained plywood with then quite a lot of wooden diffusion all over the place. Mm-hmm. And then we did this old, real particular hard linoleum. I forget the name of it now. There's a particular type of linoleum that
like a vintage linoleum kind of thing.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, right? Like we get into this, but we're ridiculous like this.
No, but we love this stuff, and I never worked there, but I remember hearing about toe rag studios in England that I think had a checkered linoleum floor and had a really distinct sound. Maybe Jack White had recorded there with the White Stripes or something. There's
something about a linoleum floor, and particularly like that vintage linoleum that I think there's just no, it's real hard. I guess there's no softness to it at all. You know, it's not like the, it's not like the, I don't know. When I was a kid, we had lived in an apartment that had this weird kind of squishy linoleum. It's not that.
Right.
It's like they're like real hard tiles, and they're glued down, and it makes for a really kind of bright. So it's a pretty bright reflection off of it, but it's not. There's something peculiarly unique about it that I just. It's immediate, and it's incredible.
What do you think was under the linoleum? A concrete slab?
Yeah, concrete slab and glue. Yeah, it's glued right to the cement, this stuff.
Okay. Right on.
And that's an interesting thing, too, especially with drums. I've had the experience lately a couple times, this is a tangent, but of recording drums in houses where you're up off the ground, you know, like when you're on you've got a crawl space beneath you. And what a vibe kill that is. I didn't realize.
Because the sound goes through the floor and disappears.
The energy just gets sucked right out of the drum. Like I never really thought about it that much. But there's everything to be said for being on the ground, especially with drums, or on a cement slab, or a cement slab with carpet on it, whatever it is, but actually being sort of connected to a real rigid surface. And I guess it makes sense. You know, it's like a speaker sounds totally different on a stand than it does sitting on a good solid foundation, and then, you know, drums are the same thing, I guess.
Yeah. What about a drum stool? Does the drum stool have to be solid?
Yeah, rocks only. Just a big rock. Just when you're sitting on this rock.
Just a rock. A little column from Fountains of Wayne. Okay, so then now taking that record into the mix stage, were there any sort of? Do you recall any favorite plugins and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there was quite a lot of grit added. So I think I think I had just gotten. Kush makes all those, those 3 or 4 Kush plugins, those gritty. I think they're called the Omegas. Here, I'm looking at it now on the iPad. Yeah, Omega AN450. Anyway, they're sort of, I guess they're technically transformer emulations, but then they've got a drive to them, and they're fucking fantastic for laying a little. There's four of them. Each one is quite a lot different than the other, and they just add. You can add a little harmonic distortion, or you can really get gritty with them. And I found them. I'd use them all the time, and even at pretty mellow use, or not driving them too much, where you solo a thing and it's not suddenly gritty, but if you put them across a bunch of tracks, it kind of has a cumulative effect that just sort of congeals transients in a way that's really nice. That again, you'd solo the track and you wouldn't probably think it, but it does. It kind of builds up on you across a lot of tracks in a mix, and it does. It really imparts a lot of. I hate to use the word vibe, but that's all I got. It imparts a lot of vibe.
Yeah, I'm looking at their website right now. They got a lot of cool looking plugins, and down at the bottom is the 3 Omega transformers. And one that I got recently, I can't even remember if I learned about it on the podcast, is Kazrog True Iron.
I don't know that one.
One that sounded pretty cool. This gets some great distortions out of it, or not even just distortions, just subtle transformer tones.
I love that shit. I've got a few transformers here in a rack. I rack mounted. I've got a couple of they're just these oddball 1-to-1 transformers that 600 ohm 1-to-1 transformers that I found. There's this place in LA called All Electronics out in the Valley. That's just literally a junkyard for NASA and JPL, and then old electronics. And it's just a junk pile. It's shocking. I think it's still there. But years ago, I was out there, and I just went out, and I just asked the guy, I was like, look, I'm looking for 600 ohm 1-to-1 transformers because I want to experiment with them just for sort of tone shaping. And the guy lit up. Like, it was the best. It was the best question. This guy had been waiting for me. I feel like this guy had been waiting for me for years, maybe. And he just started pulling out transformers. And I think I bought 4 or 5 pairs of transformers. And I've got them in a rack here, and I just wired them to XLRs, and they're near my patch bay, and I can just do little hardware loops to these transformers. And if you put them on a scope, or if you put them on a meter, they've got a really nice gentle. They've all got a real different gentle roll-offs on the high end. But again, like they shape the transients in a way, and it kind of goes into this idea, this kind of condenser versus dynamic idea with microphones. It's somehow, they have a really, really cool way of sort of slowing down. I'm sorry, that's the only, I keep saying slowing down, but I wish I had another way. I'm trying to think of another way to say it.
It's all right.
But they have a really cool way of slowing down the fidelity of a thing, you know?
There's a reason, though. I mean, when you're talking about mics, it's like it physically had to move the magnet in the transformer. And that slows things down. But in a transformer, I'm going back to my minor in electrical engineering.
No, I love this. Is my favorite talk.
Yeah. So the signal, the electrical signal, is going into a coil, and a coil slows down the flow of the electrons a little bit, and then that generates a magnetic flux current, which flies around the iron core. That then goes into the other coil side. On the other side, and
so it's magically sort of jumping through magnetic space. It's kind of fucking amazing. The signal's jumping through kind of magnetic space.
It's like swimming up a waterfall or something. It's going to slow you down.
Or you can get all metaphysical about it, and it's almost like kind of time traveling in a way, or like reality jumping, or you can get it kind of wacky about it. But it really, really is interesting sounding, and I love it. So I keep all these transformers around and just put them on hardware inserts, and I use that quite a lot. I mean, what I like about the Kooks plugins is they kind of impart some of that. They're a bit more of a grit device in my mind, but just the straight transformers really do a cool way, especially when you get a record that was maybe recorded in a home studio or recorded pretty simply with, especially you get that thing where like this person had 3 microphones. And everything was recorded through those 3 microphones, and this is, right. And it just makes for a relatively homogeneous, buildup. This transformer trick can be a really, really cool way to, put it on select devices and just make it seem like maybe you had some other microphone choices at your disposal when you didn't.
This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. So what's a trick? Let's say we've got a transformer and we're like, oh, what if this would work in our studio? What's a simple way to think about the wiring to get some sound in and then back out?
Yeah, so you've got
is it simple?
Yeah, I mean if you're probably in a balanced environment, right? So meaning pin 1, if you're thinking about an XLR or thinking about the 3 pins in your patch bay, then pin 1 is just going to earth, and then pin 2 and 3 are your audio signal. So the transformer, you just take pins 2 and 3 to the input, the primary side of the transformer, or the input of the transformer. And then out the secondary or the output of the transformer, you take same thing, pins 2 and 3 back into your recording device, and you've done it. That's kind of it. Sometimes you'll want to tie the pin 1 to pin 1 of the. You want to tie the 2 pin 1s together if it's buzzing, but it doesn't. That's just a like. Is it buzzing or is it not? If it's buzzing, try to put pins 1s together and see if it stops. But there's really nothing to it, I mean, it's. The signal is pins 2 and 3, and just jam that baby through your transformer.
And then if you, Rockstars, if you do that and then you find that it flipped the polarity of your sound,
right?
Like what used to be positive is now negative, I guess you just
reverse 2 and 3.
Flip the output of the transformer,
yeah,
or the input.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, I need to experiment with that myself. And then Do you just have those like always kind of wired up where you can just route some stuff over to it to give it a quick listen and see if you like one of those?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of hardware inserts just kind of always in. So, 17 through 25 or so, 24 or so, or these are a few different pairs of different transformers. There's a company in Texas actually called Edcore they're making modern transformers, and they are unbelievable. First of all, they're very inexpensive, and they're making really interesting transformers. They make one that is so it's 600 ohm, meaning, the same impedance as all of our line level stuff in our studio. It's all 600 ohm. And 1-to-1, meaning it doesn't impart a gain change very basically.
Right.
But they're really flat, but they make one that's, I think they call it 600 to 600 to 600. So you can use it as a splitter or a combiner. So it's kind of got a primary that you go into, and then it's got two secondaries to come out of. And so if you wanted to split a signal, you could do it in such a way, like you wanted to split a signal to two amplifiers or something, you could do it this way, and neither one would load down the other. It's very, very, very handy. You could also, and I actually have this in another rack. You can then go backwards through it, though, so to speak, where you can take two signals and combine them to one. So I've got, I'm always talking to people who have a lot of 500 series gear, let's say, and don't have any way to bust things together, right? And again, us old guys get crazy when you get. I don't want to sound like this guy, but I'm gonna. I'll get a track from somebody and I'll look and all the electric guitars. They've printed two microphones for every electric guitar rather than just summing those two microphones to one. It makes me crazy. Like just commit. Like just get a sound and commit it. I don't want to.
Just be glad I didn't bring you four microphones.
But this would be. But then I have to realize, well, this person's probably recording through a 500 series interface. But I don't have a way of summing things. That's very, very possible these days, right? But this would be a way you can do it, though.
Because I remember being there, is like you when you're at that stage, you just don't know. Your confidence it isn't there yet, and you're going to work with somebody cool like you, Todd. And you're like, he'll know. Well, he'll know what sounds good.
Come on, just make a choice, though. Come on. But
right. I'm describing my young self.
The point being, though, with this cool Edcore 2-to-1 transformer, though, is that it's basically you could wire it as a bus, and you could take, you could have two microphones going to your 500 rack to a couple mic pre's, take the output of those into both secondaries of the transformer, and just take the primary out to your recording interface and sum those microphones that way. And it's a perfect,
very cool.
It's fantastic, and it sounds great. Warms it up a little bit, shaves off some top. It's fantastic.
So that kind of thing, Rockstars, we could get and just hook it up to our patch bay if you have a patch bay, and then forget about it. Now you just patch through it when you want to use it. You can patch in reverse to split two outputs, or patch two inputs and sum it together and get a new output. So a very cool thing. And I'm looking at their website now. Yeah. And the transformers are like
$50,
it's a variety, $30, $40, whatever.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
Very
it's
cool.
Very
man.
good stuff. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's see. I mean, we are closing in on the finish line here. Have you got a moment for, do you want to do a question or two? Okay. Great. So let me see what I want to have. Oh yeah. Let's just go to this one. Let's go to other end of the spectrum on some of the music in your playlist. M83, that artist, great, like very modern EDM almost style production and mixes. Even though the tempos weren't necessarily like 4 on the floor kick. What to you what was that project? How was that different from working with rock bands and miking stuff up? Maybe it did start out as a rock band.
Yeah. So that project was, M83 is by and large a guy named Anthony, and he's very, very good at just sort of recording himself in his own space. So that record, I engineered a small, I didn't mix that record. Tony Hoffer mixed that record. And a buddy of mine named Justin Meldal Johnson produced it. And that record was made primarily in a house with just Justin and as the producer and Anthony kind of cobbling it together bit by bit. I came in for, I think, a week or two, and we went to Sunset and recorded a bunch of drums and recorded a bunch of stuff basically they couldn't do at home. So my involvement on that was, the classic kind of like rock band elements of the record, of which there's not a ton, but there's probably half of that record has got analog drums, sometimes in just a section, sometimes for the whole record. What else we did? I think we did some guitars that we'd wanted to have in a bigger room. So we were at Sunset and had some space. So I think we went back and replaced certain instruments that we wanted to get some real room on. But that's a really cool record. I'm really, really happy to have been a part of that. Those guys, Tony and Justin, are, some old and dear friends, and a major part of sort of the network and the circle of friends that have made my time in LA possible and super fun,
Yeah, and it has that great quality of, it's cool to hear you describing recording the drums, band, guitars, those kind of things, because where the record ends up, at least the tracks that are in the playlist, has this over-the-top quality to it by the time it reaches the finish line, which is cool. And you're like, wow, it's like, how do you get there? And it sounds like there's EDM tricks like parallel compression happening on things that make things,
a lot of that,
bloom and explode in between the beats and stuff like that.
Yeah, and just compositionally, Anthony is just a master of like that. Like, it's just, the song just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you just can't believe there's another step yet to even bigger, and you can't,
right.
It is that like overwhelmed, just freaking out on MDMA when you were in your 20s feeling that, you just can't believe it's still going.
I think about sessions like that in the studio, and when you look at the mix, it looks like a long, fattening triangle sometimes, and which is really hard to do when I have bands, that want to have these long, quiet intros and then explode at the end. And then, I'm like looking at the mix. I'm like, how do you put all this together where it all makes sense and doesn't just sound too loud at the very end?
Very tricky.
Or too quiet at the very beginning.
It's very tricky. Yeah.
All right. Well, so let me go to this question. This is our hypothetical question I get to ask all the guests on the show. And again, thank you for coming and hanging with us today, Todd. Great to chat with you. We're going to take the hypothetical way back studio machine, and you get to go back in time and find young Todd and say, listen, dude, I know you're working hard on your music, or let's see, what was the first thing? Oh, maybe you're like, you're thinking about going to Crass to learn this stuff. And you want go back to give yourself some advice, and you say, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day.
Geez.
What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
Wow. That's a really big question. But I'll say
no
this.
Right answer.
So I think the thing that served me best, let's say, in all these years of doing this, is just having an extreme sort of patience. And I think I think that's sort of everything. And especially, particularly now, I think when, there's a little less time spent in the studio really exploring, really fleshing out songs and stuff. And it's a little bit more of a hurry to get things done. I think the best thing you can do, honestly, is just maybe just take a deep breath and stop hurrying so much and take the time to get stuff right. I remember back when budgets were a little more free or larger, and it kind of went without saying you were going to take 4 or 5 weeks to make this record, and that meant you really could you could brush your teeth in the morning and go to work and not feel like you had to milk every minute out of the day. You could be a little more laid back. And that
until week 3.
Yeah. But it's harder to get that feeling, I think, but it's important to not rush, we're making art that's going to live forever, and you're making decisions, every minute that you're going to be living with for a very long time. And, I try to even, I guess maybe I'm talking to myself now. I keep trying to remind myself to just calm down and just take the time to get it right. this isn't a race, and it's easy when you're young to feel like you got to do all the work in the world, but like, just take it easy. just get it right.
I loved the process, and still do when I get to do it, of just camping out with the record.
Totally. Yeah.
You know, not having to do just a day's work and something different tomorrow, you know, but wake up still thinking about the song you did yesterday.
I mean, remember leaving a mix up overnight? That was fantastic. I'd come in the next day, put a big piece of tape across the console, like, do not touch the whole thing. But it was, there was sort of a preciousness though. There was sort of a preciousness and an unwillingness to kind of give up at the 80% mark, you know, or there was never like, that's good enough. We'll figure it out later.
Right.
You figured out everything in the moment. And I miss those days, and I'm very actively trying to be more in that mindset constantly, you know? And I think probably most anyone could take that advice and it would serve them well.
Well, and then you talk about console tape or tape across the console. That was also a time with track sheets and console tape for the, you know, naming and labeling the faders. And so much great artwork happened on those things.
I've still got,
where does the artwork live?
I've saved a few rows of console tape from records back in the day, and they're fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, you start because you spend so much time with the song, you can really doodle and break out the colored markers.
Totally.
And, you know, draw ridiculous cartoons of your friends, things like that.
It's so true.
Now in the computer, I don't know where it happens. I guess
we need a scribble strip and some way to just draw. Yeah. It'd be good stuff.
Yeah. That would make the DOS so much more interesting.
It would. Yeah.
Todd, thanks for hanging with us on Recording Studio Rockstars. Rockstars, thanks for listening. Where would you like them to go connect with you? What if they're ready to run all their next record through the coolest transformers and, you know, mix it and master it with you? Or whatever?
Hit me up, toddburke.com. There's a contact sheet there you could hit me up on. And, you know, and even for dumb stuff, if you just want to hit me up and ask some questions, I'm here for it. You know, like I don't joke around about legitimately wanting to sort of give back to especially younger creators. And, you know, toddburke.com, hit it up.
Right on. And then Rockstars, because you're listening and maybe driving your car right now, TODDBURKE.
That's it.
In case you couldn't glance down at your phone or your car stereo or wherever you're listening. Todd, thanks for hanging with us in studio. I look forward to seeing you in person again. I guess I'll see you out in California or here in Nashville.
See you, man, next time I'm sure or something. Yeah, sounds good.
Looking forward to it, dude. All right.
Take it easy. Yeah,
cheers. Right. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible. Lewitt, Grace Design, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plug-in purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support the show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're gonna help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.